we've made some mistakes, and I think we are actively working to reinvigorate some of the programs and focus areas to try to fix some of those errors.
Welcome to the LabVIEW experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. I'm here today with Kerry. Some of you who've been around the LabVIEW community probably know Eli from way back. Those of you who are new probably know that Eli is now the head of, what's your official title?
I'm the director of the NI software community.
Okay, so basically community manager or something like that is a good title. What's the term that everybody throws around all the time? Developer relations or something? I think that's like a big thing on Twitter. Everybody wants to be a developer relations person.
Okay.
Anyway, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about your history at NI for those who don't know?
Sure. So I started at NI in 2006. I actually had my job interview on the day 8.0 was released. And I joined in the throes of launching 8.2 or 8.20. After only a few months, joined the LabVIEW product marketing team at the time. So I then went on to spend the last 18 years in that role. So I've either been in some form of product marketing management or product management. And at some point I managed all of the core test software product managers. But I think more importantly, when I first joined the team, at the time, there was a big focus on proving that LabVIEW could be used beyond these kind of novice, elementary type of laboratory applications. And there was a lot of focus on proving that it could scale towards more complex applications. So I was the guy tasked with helping our customers and the industry understand how to use LabVIEW in a robust way that ensured scalability and performance and quality. And it got into topics like software engineering and team-based development. And ultimately also I championed a lot of the investments over the years to help better serve that market area. So I think looking back, people like yourself and the LabVIEW community have obviously proven that LabVIEW is, I think, unique in its ability to scale while remaining approachable. And so it's awesome to look at the scale and complexity of LabVIEW applications. I spent a lot of time with customers too. So I have gotten to see some really awesome applications using our tools. Some I can't talk about, others like CERN, I obviously can. And so that was my focus for, 15 years or so. And then I left, well, I didn't leave NI. I went to the transportation business unit where I had the chance to focus on our efforts around electric vehicles, which was very different focus for me. It was really around an offering serving a targeted market vertical. And then I returned to this role, I guess about 5 weeks ago.
Cool. Yeah, I think one of the earliest memories I have of you is CLA summits, probably around like 2009, 2010. I remember you're out there promoting stuff like design patterns and classes and Get and Actor Framework and all of those type of things.
I kind of.
Yeah. Oh, go.
No, go ahead. Well, CLA Summit, so I was actually, when I first joined, internal employees were discouraged or not even allowed to get a CLA, right? For some silly reason that quickly got put by the wayside. And so when that got undone, I think I was one of the first employees, certainly the first in my department to get the CLA. And so, yeah, I went to the CLA Summit both as an NI person and as like an architect. And I found that a lot of my time was spent synthesizing like all of the common problems people had. I was like, well, let me just try to figure it out. And probably the best example is, how do we use source code control with LabVIEW? Like that was one of the topics. It's amazing. Jaws would hit the floor when I do a graphical diff. Then I got into object-oriented programming and abstraction layers and plugin architecture. So I always kind of spent my time at the edge of stuff that most of my employees, especially in marketing, didn't really understand, but was really, I think, material to advancing LabVIEW amongst more advanced use cases and amongst the CLA community. And so, yeah, I didn't miss a CLA Summit, I think, for first 5 or 6 years.
So I'm curious with these better practices for scaling LabVIEW, do you find that there's like a certain point where these things start to apply? Or like sometimes I feel like obviously source code control applies to like projects of all sizes. But I
Right.
do a lot of small and medium sized stuff. And sometimes I feel like people doing small and medium projects want to emulate these giant projects. And I feel like they just have different issues. And so like if you're doing a really small project, you're like everything must be in PPLs and all this other stuff. And I feel like it adds some perhaps unneeded complexity. Does that make sense? Or you think that that stuff's always applicable?
I mean, I, I I forget who exactly coined s'mores. I think maybe it was Norm, right?
Yeah,
But
norm
I
is
always,
definitely.
yeah, Norm. And so it was always about the last F's, right? Like don't over engineer it. The last one being simple, right? Keep it as
Hmm.
simple as you can. And mind you, that's not something that's specific or unique to LabVIEW or LabVIEW programmers. I think it's true of any and all software. Uh, I do think the goalposts have shifted, right? Like in other words, 20 years ago, something like source code control was probably viewed as, well, that's for complex stuff. And now I think all of us would be like feel incredibly uncomfortable if even a small project wasn't kept in source code control. I know I'm having fun dusting off my LabVIEW experience programming this Challenge of the Champions app that I'm working on, and like, of course, it's in Git. Like, I wouldn't even want to chance it for a myriad of reasons we can get into. So, like, there's stuff like that that I think, as the state of the market and of just all things software engineering has evolved, that maybe the answer has shifted. When it comes to other aspects of it, I think now you would look at things like CI and CD and plugin architectures. You mentioned like PPLs. Yeah, I mean, it all kind of comes down to what your key requirements are and what success looks like. I think the thing that is always really tough to anticipate, that is often at the root of why people are having challenges, is they started with a very myopic view on the immediate needs, but then over time it's like, well, let's add more requirements, let's add more capabilities. Oh man, this is getting hard to maintain, let's add more developers, let's add more developers. Like, oh, let's try to compartmental. And so to the extent possible, if you can anticipate, like, will this application ever grow into another level of complexity and try to accommodate that? Although that said, it still may not make good sense to overinvest in a componentized abstraction layer using PPLs if you just don't need that out of the gate. So I don't know. I think that's the art of architecting software, and also why I don't think AI is going to take all our jobs anytime soon. You need someone with experience and knowledge that can make those types of decisions and balance quality and scalability with the need to get stuff done.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make with Git because I definitely saw that when I started. It was definitely still zip files and then it
Yeah.
gradually it's become the norm now. Do you feel you mentioned CI/CD? I kind of feel like that is the next thing to become a norm because I hear lots and lots of people talking about. I'm not sure how many people are actually doing it though, or if it's just like people are talking about it because they want to do it.
Yeah, I'm still, again, having kind of been out of the core architect world for the last few years, I'm also playing a little bit of catch up and trying to understand what the state of the union is, as the best practices are. It's clearly something everybody's talking about. And I think some folks in the community have gone to great lengths to build, containerized solutions that use LabVIEW and like Docker, for example, for CI and CD workflows. But I think it's just hard enough that it's probably only an elite few that are able to do it at scale. I'll tell you on behalf of NI, it's something that we know we need to improve how well the tools facilitate it. So you're going to hear us talk a little bit about this at NI Connect, but we'll even acknowledge this is something we're going to continue to invest in improving moving forward for tools like LabVIEW and TestHand, et cetera. I think CI/CD, yeah, it's a thing that increasingly people can and should be doing. And so, yeah, I think it's still on the cusp of fairly advanced, but it's going. I anticipate it'll be more mainstream, if not already, pretty imminently.
So it seems to me like in general, LabVIEW kind of lags behind the general software engineering community as far as like the latest and greatest tools and techniques and stuff. Do you have any insight into that, like why that is, or is that something NI is aware of and trying to push more, or
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, you know, I actually crashed a Core One class the other day. Was being taught it in a corporate, and so we got all the students to join us for lunch and just get their take on their experience with LabVIEW and what they liked or didn't like, et cetera. And while it's just one data point, one thing I was struck by is 100% of the attendees were mechanical engineers, right? And 100% of them had no interest, desire, or really meaningful experience with other languages or, alternatives like Python or C Sharp or anything else. And so for them, it was the natural, logical tool, which, I'm telling you and everybody else watching this probably what they already know, and that is LabVIEW really appeals to people with an engineering background that don't necessarily consider themselves to be a programmer. And so I think the natural consequence of that is, regardless of the state of the tool, is that it appeals to people that don't want to know what CI or CD is, or even configuration management or abstraction layers. And so it empowers them. And some of them will forever be well served with a fairly constrained set of workflows and experiences with the tools. And that's fine. We love that customer. Like, we want to make sure that customer is wildly successful. However, some of those folks will find that whatever they do in LabVIEW gets larger and larger and larger. And so, like it or not, we kind of inadvertently turn them into software engineers. And so all the same problem statements that have led the greater community to arrive at things like Git and CI and CD, I think will naturally come onto their radar if they continue to progress in terms of their scale and complexity. So I think we lag it, but it's kind of independent of the state of the tool itself, and more just a result of like the nature of the people we appeal to, and how it's only going to be a finite subset of them that find themselves needing to care about those more advanced concepts. So that would be my hot take on your question.
So I have a related question, and it kind of goes to the nature of LabVIEW and the projects that we do. So sometimes when I'm trying to push the latest and greatest stuff, right, I see somebody in the greater software engineering community talk about something like, oh, that sounds like a great idea, we should do that in LabVIEW. And a lot of the pushback I get is, well, LabVIEW is different. And so therefore, and it is different, right? But is it different enough that the software engineering greater principles don't apply in some cases? Or, and I think, I don't know, part of that in my mind is the fact that we're so close to the hardware, right? So like something that works for like a web app, obviously for something that's a desktop based thing that's talking to hardware, there's going to be some differences. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I think all the same processes can and should be applied. Well, I guess I should be careful. Can be applied.
Yeah.
And LabVIEW, it's so hard to explain and defend the nature of LabVIEW. I think those of us that like live it and use it on a regular basis, we know it, but articulating it, especially in a way that is objective and easy to impart to somebody who's never used it, is just hard. Like, and that's one of the biggest challenges of my job in marketing LabVIEW, is like, people who know. And so I think there's a lot of appeal in just the graphical representation of the flow of information through your diagram. And furthermore, that the nature of, to your point, it being so close to the hardware, is that you're dealing with data, you're dealing with real signals from the real world, and trying to understand and represent the manipulation of those. And so the diagram and the graphical nature of it, I think, just make it a really approachable and intuitive way for engineers, especially, to understand that. Now, your question about software engineering, though, I don't think it's a unique question to LabVIEW. In other words, like, apply only as much software engineering as is necessary and is prudent, regardless of the language you're using. Like, should you be doing static and dynamic code analysis and regression testing, or even test-driven development? I don't know. Like, that's not really a LabVIEW specific question. That's more of a, well, are you working in a highly regulated environment where you have to meet with qualification standards and prove, that your application is of a certain quality bar? And it's overhead, right? It's a business decision as much as it is a technical one. It's overhead, it's time, it's man hours. And And so that investment should be proportional to the risk profile and the return associated with doing or not doing that. And I did spend a lot of time, especially in avionics and in medical, where a lot of that stuff was really required, right? Like under my watch, we came out with unit test framework and the dynamic code analyzer, desktop execution-based toolkit. And then obviously we have VI analyzer. And so all of those were aimed at better enabling software engineering processes to be applied to LabVIEW. But we didn't go out there and tell everybody they have to use it for obvious reasons. So again, it kind of comes back to having an architect in charge that can make those types of decisions.
Yeah, I think those types of decisions usually are best made when they start with what are you trying to achieve, right? Like, what is your goal? Just doing something because everybody else is doing is not necessarily the greatest. But there's also like, I also look at it as if I'm watching the greater software engineering world and I notice that one particular technique is really taken off and it seems to be the mainstay, right? There's probably a reason for that, and it's worth investigating that and understanding that. And maybe it doesn't apply in every situation, but it's good to understand like where that comes from and what problem it solves. I
Yeah,
think. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. Um, but that said, if you look at the greater software engineering world, like pick any arbitrary GitHub repo, you'll find a huge dynamic range in terms of the extent to which they're applying some of those practices. And that's because it's not always necessary. Now, you'll also find a huge dynamic range in terms of quality, but that's another decision based on time, resources, like what level of quality was necessary versus like feature velocity, et cetera.
Yeah, I think part of that too ties to like the business goals, like what to your point earlier too about like lifetime, like how long are you going to have to maintain this piece of
Yep.
code? I think one of the challenges, and this is a general software engineering challenge, but I think we face it a lot in LabVIEW, is dealing with legacy code and existing systems because you
Mhm.
learn how like in general software, you go to college and you learn how to do stuff and you're always starting from a greenfield project, and it's this like you just start writing code. And in the LabVIEW Core 1 and Core 2, you do a lot of just writing code because you're trying to figure out how to do stuff. But then generally, like the first job you get, they hand you this thing and hey, this thing's been around for 20 years. Here, add this new feature. And you're like, I don't know where to start.
So so actually to go back to that core one class I crashed, I think 100% of them were here or at our headquarters because they were inheriting code. So somebody wrote something and they're being added to the team, or that person's on a new job or whatever. And so now they're tasked with consuming this LabVIEW application and trying to maintain and sustain it. So like that's a very, very common use case. Probably again, not something necessarily unique to LabVIEW. There's probably a lot of inherited code in the greater software world. Um, for those of you coming to NI Connect, one fun tidbit we will show in the keynote is the latest work we've done with AI and its application LabVIEW. And one of the specific use cases is helping understand somebody else's code, right? Like I'm given this diagram. How do I know how to add another hardware channel to it? Help me understand it. So I think it's a challenge. It's a perennial challenge in anybody's language. It's funny too, because some people talk about the LabVIEW as being spaghetti code and hard to understand. I'll actually turn that into, I'll argue the benefit, right? If you open somebody's Python code, it's going to take you looking at it for a good chunk of time to determine, is this good quality code or is this spaghetti code? You open a LabVIEW block diagram, you kind of know right away what level of code quality you're dealing with right off the bat.
Yeah, it's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder, so is the LabVIEW situation though with legacy code a little bit harder? I and this is just me, but I feel like the version upgrades is an issue, particularly with really old stuff. It's gotten better over the years, but I think the
Mm-hmm.
other issue is the hardware and driver upgrades and stuff. I feel like a lot of what prevents people from upgrading old code to newer versions of LabVIEW tends to be that the hardware support is only so long and it's out, so that forces them to stick with older versions. Do you find that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think by far and away, there was a time there. I don't know exactly why. I'm sure something that we did in marketing, but we were getting a lot of pushback from customers. This is like 10 years ago about like, why are you trying to give me an upgrade every year? Like, this is incredibly problematic. And I think we had to quickly explain, look, our general recommendation and what we see as best practices is roughly a 3 to 5 year cadence where you're planning for it and you're actually going to like do the necessary testing to evaluate the quality and screen for any bugs or escapes that may occur as a result. But on the one hand, if you never upgrade, because like there are customers out there running crazy old LabVIEW applications. I can think of a few that I knew were running 5.0 applications. Now, there's an element of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So like, great. If you're never going to touch it or change it, more power to you. However, it's trying to maintain and add to or support new hardware that can be problematic. And even in those old applications, if you're using hardware that's EOL, then you need to upgrade it. Like suddenly it's going to be really expensive and prohibitive to try to upgrade from like 5.0 to 2024 versus like maintaining some sort of 3 to 5 year cycle. And I think the defense contractors of the world, I saw a shift in their mindset where it used to be lock it down, never touch it. And they realized they couldn't do that because of hardware. And so the more sophisticated organizations gravitated towards more of this regular upgrade cycle. Now, your point was more on how LabVIEW can make that harder than it need be. I'll argue, you look at other languages like Python, there's a lot of, what runtime, what dependency, or what runtime was this dependency written in, et cetera, and just trying to get everything stitched together. But we also can do better. And so also teasing my keynote, we'll be showing we need a better punchier name for it, but the save in previous version feature, the whole point of which is, I think, going back to LabVIEW 2017, I believe, you can open up 2024 and keep the source in whatever version it was written in. So you can use the new editor features, but you can actually save and modify the source while keeping it in the previous runtime. And if you try to do things that mean you're going to inject some new feature that wasn't supported in that version, it'll warn you so that you are aware if you're going to force an upgrade. So hopefully it makes it easier for people to get access to the new features and the latest editors without forcing an upgrade of code. And I think that'll be advantageous too for a lot of open source projects and collaborations, right? You don't want to be the guy that upgrades everybody else and forces them to have to move before they wanted to.
Yeah, I really do like that idea. I know I've been bit in the past, when back in the old days when we had multiple versions of LabVIEW on the same machine, you double click something, you accidentally open it in a newer version and save it and don't think about it, and it hoses everybody else. So
and that's why now everybody uses VMs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe now we can stop using VMs as much and switch to this. We'll see. I'm curious to see the community's reaction.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about it. So for project work, I'm not entirely sure it helps me particularly because a lot of the reason I have VMs, part of it is for LabVIEW versions, but also hardware drivers for specific projects, for specific pieces of hardware. And I don't know if they all necessarily play well together.
Well, you can then,
yeah.
I mean, you could still have a bunch of VMs, so you make sure you get your sandbox with all the stuff for the right driver, and then use the latest version of LabVIEW.
Yeah. The other thing is too, right? When you build it, so you still need to set up a CI/CD virtual machine with the correct version, right? And my particular workflow at the moment, which may change, is when I get a new project, I create the VM for the CI/CD, and then I just copy that, and that becomes my development machine once I have everything installed.
Okay.
But the two use cases though I do see for that feature, you mentioned open source. I think that's really great because I don't know, I've wanted to contribute to, I think it was Karaya, and it was written in LabVIEW 2014. And I was like, I don't have LabVIEW 2014 installed. So what do I do? Right? Am I going to go set up a virtual machine just to make a contribution? And so that causes some problems.
Yeah.
The other one though too is tooling. Sometimes people write tools and maybe the tool requires some newer feature of LabVIEW in order to do its thing on the back end, but the code that it's operating on could be older code. So particularly for refactoring tools, that's one area that I'm very much interested in. I think a lot of other languages have very robust refactoring tools. I don't know if you've played around, but IntelliJ and PyCharm and VS Code and some of those things have plugins that give you a lot of refactoring options. So the one thing I'm very much interested in that I think causes a lot of problems in LabVIEW is how hard it is to refactor class-based code, new code. Moving stuff around breaks links, and it's not easy to... There's a lot of operations that in a text-based language are like 1 or 2 clicks in the editor, and in LabVIEW it requires a bunch of moving things around and renaming them, And I think some tooling in that area would be very welcome. And with this new model, right, I could write that tooling in the latest version of LabVIEW, so I could take advantage of sets and maps and things and still operate on code that's in 2017. So I think
Yeah.
that's a good use case.
Yeah. So hopefully then that means you and others are empowered to write more of those refactoring tools and scripting tools. But I'm thinking of like some of the message maker tools that exist for Actor Framework and other things as
Yeah,
good examples of that. Yeah. Like, I mean, yes, I agree with you. So hopefully this is a step towards better enabling that type of
yeah.
investment.
So to that end, does NI? I know you can't really speak for NI, but is there any value in NI producing those tools, or you think that's something more of a community driven thing, or both?
I can speak to NI. It's fine.
Okay.
I'm probably transparent to a fault. So the there's obviously a lot of talk at NI these days about more investment to our software and really showing our users in the community that we have a robust, really exciting roadmap of new features and technologies. That said, I want to acknowledge, I think that some of these use cases that like you're bringing to these refactoring tools for classes, frankly, I think people like yourself who live and work in classes on a daily basis as part of your job are in some weird way better suited to build those types of tools in NI. And so when we talk about the future of our software, I think there are things that only we can do. And we increasingly want to dedicate ourselves to focus on those and then better enable the community to build those types of tools that I think are not really aligned with what our unique differentiated knowledge that enables. And so I think this is where a big part of my role is facilitating a stronger collaboration and relationship with the community so that we can strengthen that handshake. I don't want to be like, oh, this is the community's problem, throw it over the wall. Like I want to support the efforts. But attending some of the sessions at GLA Summit and just talking with people like yourselves, like the level of knowledge you have of how to use, and I'm using the royal you, the community, the level of knowledge that the community has and how to best use LabVIEW and how to handle some of these more advanced use cases and manipulations like you're describing with classes. I would rather us enable your efforts than try to do it ourselves because I worry we're at risk of missing the mark. In the meantime, we'll focus on the compiler and FPGAs and supporting the latest hardware and integrating AI and doing things that I think NI clearly has to do because it's at the core of the LabVIEW technology in our software platform. And that what makes sense for us to do versus community. Like I'm not suggesting there's like a hard and fast line. And I think some things like the icon editor, like that'll be a collaboration that really taps into the knowledge of the community. But yeah, I just want to be honest about, I think people that use classes on a daily basis to program large LabVIEW systems are probably better suited to build the types of tooling you used in your example than the average NI R&D developer.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it would be nice if there was a way for community tools to get more integrated into LabVIEW. Like it would be nice if certain things just ship with LabVIEW, or I don't know if you're familiar with the JSON text, but somehow Dr. Powell got JSON text stuck somewhere on the palettes where you can go and you still have to click a button and download and install the package, but NI makes it very easy to access that tool.
Oh, well, can I challenge that a little bit? Because I think one thing I struggle with is that right now, if you look at LabVIEW, we install a lot. We kind of
Well,
assume
there's
like you might just need everything and anything, and so we're just going to make it take forever. And like how like again, this is me being probably too transparent. So I would rather see us like get down to a more atomic set of like the minimum stuff, and then streamline how easy it is to get some of these other things if and when you need them. So like frankly, VI Package Manager does a fantastic job of making it easy to install these nuggets, be it IP or tool chains, et cetera. So I don't know, like I did just pushing back a little bit. Do you really want to see us build in more of those community-led tools into the product, or is really what you're saying it needs to be easy for the
Yeah, I
user to
think like a
get them?
nudge, right, from NI, like, hey, like for example, with JSON text, there's a bunch of JSON libraries on VIPM, and if I want to know
True.
which one's the best, right, and the JSON text one kind of has this like NI endorsement, like here's the easy way to do it, for better or
Yeah,
worse.
There's also ratings and reviews, right? Like there's
Yeah,
the free market economy of like how many stars you're willing to give it, which kind of I realize like that's problematic, but I don't know. I personally would rather see LabVIEW get to be like super fast and easy to install. Especially you think
yeah,
about like students and hobbyists and stuff like that. And that means taking a lot of the stuff we include by default out and going the other way.
yeah. I want to continue that thread in a second, but before we leave the add-ons and stuff and tools, there is one thing that I do think that NI could do that the
Okay.
community certainly can't, and that is adding more hooks potentially into
Hmm.
LabVIEW. Like for example, the project provider, it
I knew you were
exists,
going to bring
it
that up. Yeah.
sucks, but it'd be really nice, like for a particular project that I'm working on, it'd be really nice to have like a on save hook. So I want, I've been trying to do this auto formatting thing. So I hate
Hmm.
having to write code and then run VI Analyzer. It tells me all this nitpicky stuff, and then I have to go back and change it. Like I just want a set of rules that I can run every time I save something, and it just aligns it the way I want, and it's done.
Hmm.
And having a save hook would make that a heck of a lot easier, where LabVIEW just says, hey, I'm about to save this VI, and it gives me the reference, and I can do whatever I want with it. And then when that VI exits, LabVIEW continues with its save process and everything's good. And I'm sure there's some other hooks that would be useful too. And my understanding from digging through the project provider is that doesn't exist. Maybe it does, and I just haven't found it. But the project provider itself is really clunky and hard to use.
I've never waded into the innards of the project provider, but I've only heard feedback exactly what you're describing about it. Only great things.
Yeah,
That was right. That was in the heyday of 8.0, right? That was
yeah.
lots of lessons to be learned from the 8.0 release. But I think this is in the spirit of better enabling open source development with
Hmm.
the community. I would rather us spend our time on making those types of hooks available than trying to build the tooling ourselves.
Yep.
So
No,
I think we talked, yeah. So like, by the way, part of the problem now is like, well, what's the right list of hooks? Like, oh, put it on ID Exchange, where I think I looked and there was like 44,000 suggestions
oh,
now. So
yeah.
I think though, as we start to make a few things open source, what I'm like kind of what I'm anticipating, well, that there will be a core group of people who are especially active, who clearly show value and they're collaborating and they're adding value to the IP we've made available. And then I think those individuals get to have an outsized voice in what we need to do to better enable their efforts moving forward.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm anticipating that I'll need to spend some of my time dedicated towards really cultivating and fostering like a meaningful relationship with people that help us with our open source effort. And I think that will go in the scope of those relationships. And yeah, I agree with you. Like we should, seems like you should be able to get a reference to a VI before it gets saved. That doesn't seem like a crazy ask.
Yep.
So I don't know. That's how I anticipate
Well,
trying to channel and support those types of apps.
you're the first person I've asked, so it might be useful if NI was like, if there was a contact person to like go to ask those types of questions, perhaps in the future at some point. I don't know. Maybe that's you
Um, I
at the
think it's
moment.
me. I
Okay.
think I'm the community
Then
guy.
I found the right person.
Right? Like the NI values, I think we still like it's the number one, like be a connector. I'm basically a professional connector, so I can try to arbitrate and support the steps of that.
Yeah. Great. So you mentioned install time. So I would like to take a turn. So we've been talking about high-end users, but something I've seen at the moment is that it's kind of hard. A lot of companies are struggling to find new LabVIEW talent.
Yeah.
And there's been some changes in the academic world and stuff. And you mentioned install. So one of the things, I don't know if you've seen this, but you should go look up, I think it's called Coding Dojo or something, or Code Dojo, Cyber Dojo, I
Hmm.
think it's called. But you can go and you can, in a web browser, open up a session with an editor in a variety of languages, text-based languages, and you can type in some code and press enter and it runs in the web
Hmm.
browser. And they have some problems that you can play around with and stuff. And if you go to the Rust website, for example, there's an online Rust compiler that you just type stuff in and play around with it. And I feel like,
Yeah.
those of us in the LabVIEW world, we know the value of LabVIEW, right? We see that subscription price and we don't get sticker shock because we know the value that it brings. But I think somebody who has never tried LabVIEW gets sticker shock when they see that price. And it would be good to have some way to show them, like, here's what you get for that price. Here's how convenient it is. Here's how it works. And so I don't know if there's any plans within NI to do that, but that's something that I think would be very beneficial in growing the community.
Well, so I agree with you. There are some things we're doing. I think what you started with is like obviously there's all these really accessible thin client interfaces for writing code. And I think the key distinction with LabVIEW is ultimately we're built around integration with hardware and physical measurements. You've got this need for kernel level IO and configuration. That said, like we still need to lower the barriers. And there are things we could talk about, especially, I think I have a Raspberry Pi somewhere in the store behind me, but like, like you take hobbyist hardware like this and making it possible to just have the ADE installed and hit the IP address and start coding with no installation. I think those are things that we can and should continue to explore. Um, one thing we're doing too, though, is if you look at how we created such an large global LabVIEW community over the course of the company's history, so much of it was boots on the ground, getting people FaceTime with the product, eyeballs, writing code, using hardware. So I think the other element is we got to start doing that more. I think COVID, kind of just threw everything up in the air with regards to events, and we've obviously made some structural changes to how we do those types of things. So I know we just finished retooling the LabVIEW hands-on, and I think it needed to have some serious updates to better showcase the product. So expect to see more of those. And I think tapping into the advocacy of our users within accounts and in certain geographies, we just need more people learning and using the product. And you mentioned academic too, because it used to be that there was a very large, healthy pipeline of students coming out of academia. And given our shift in focus, that has waned. We have a newly reformed academic team. We're talking a few months ago, and they're going to be renewing our efforts and collaborations with leading universities. I think we still have some excellent relationships with some really influential people. And I think we know we need to strengthen ties with academia because that student pipeline is such a critical part of companies and their tool selection. So we've made some mistakes, and I think we are actively working to reinvigorate some of the programs and focus areas to try to fix some of those errors. And one of them being frankly, I'll say it this way, taking academic for granted. And then as far as a thin client interface to LabVIEW, I'm not saying I wouldn't love to have it, but I think the focus has to be on showcasing how well it works with the hardware.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I assume you're aware of the CTI stuff that Steve is doing.
Steve Watts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I could see that. I mean, yeah, getting a web interface to LabVIEW, okay, that might be pie in the sky. But I do think like having a very lightweight virtual machine image that anybody could just download and run with VirtualBox on their machine, that is very useful. And
is that in the
that you
scope
could,
of CTI?
yeah, the CTI has a yeah, OpenSUSE image that you can just download. It's got the community edition pre-installed. Yeah, if you haven't checked that out, you should.
I need to connect with. I've
Yeah.
talked with Steve. We didn't get into the throes of CTI, so that's
Yeah,
awesome.
but it would be
Yes, let's
great.
do
Yeah,
that.
and yeah, he's working on trying to get it even smaller. I think they've got a one that may be like 4 or 8 gigs or something, which is like it's large, but you could download that in a few minutes if you have a fast connection. And that plays into your hardware thing because that's, you can do like USB pass through, and you can also, if you have CRIO or something, if it's on the same network, you can see it, and so that
Yeah.
could get into some of the hardware side as well.
Yeah.
Steve's thing they have a Raspberry Pi Pico which is like a little kind of like
That's
Arduino type
small.
board, but they have a thing that you can put a driver on it, so it shows up like a VESA instrument, and so it's
Oh,
kind of
cool.
like you have like a little Keithley instrument sitting there in the box, and you can send it commands and stuff. So I'm sure you could do, you know, uh, it'd be easy enough to like simulate a CDAC chassis and do some stuff that way too, or something.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I support that. The other thing too is like when it comes to students, I don't know about you, but when I left university, I'd never really heard of test and measurement. Like, I feel like the engineering mindset in school is really focused on like, I'm going to design stuff. And then I realized like what a hugely important part of any product development is test and measurement. And so like, I think, I don't know, this is probably a topic for another time, but working with universities to create more awareness of T&M as a profession, and then, the importance then of actually being able to interact with, iterate on, and evaluate these devices and the physical signals they generate. Because so much of academia is really focused in theory and math and simulation. And so I think as we kind of re-engage academia, we're keen to really help them understand the importance of real world data. We're kind of interacting with the 300 and 400 level courses where you're starting to actually build meaningful real systems. But yeah, I don't know. This is part of our renewed focus on that pipeline of students, and I love what you're describing that Steve's doing. So I want to learn how I can better support his efforts too.
Yeah, I wonder if in academia we need like a focus on test and measurement, like maybe not at its own degree, but like
Right?
within like electrical engineering, right? There's like power engineering, there's controls, there's all these things. There could be like a test and measurement. It could be like it would actually probably be good for like somebody double majoring maybe in mechanical and electrical, right? Because that would be like all the skills, right? Designing the
Yeah.
sensors and all that, and then also the electrical side.
Well, it's weird too. Like I remember taking a robotics course. It's like obviously a key part of how you get the thing to work because it never works the first
Yeah.
time. You have to iterate, you debug, but no one ever puts like a name to it and says what you're doing right now is a form of test engineering. And
Hmm.
it is a natural part of the development process, but it's not something that is really emphasized or explicitly named as such. And so the fact that there's whole tooling and workflows that are distinct from the design activities, I think is foreign to most students leaving university.
Hmm. Yeah. Very interesting. So one question that I always like to ask people is, can you tell me about an experiment that you tried that didn't turn out the way you thought it would? And what did you learn?
Okay. And it has to be, I assume, related to the,
Not necessarily.
okay,
If you get a
an
good lesson from
experiment.
something outside of a LabVIEW space, that's fine.
It's like a job interview. Um, so, um, I'm, that's a tough question. A part of me wants to call upon my experiences doing like home automation projects and the myriad of different technologies and standards I've played around with throughout the years. But I think for this audience, the the elephant in the room has got to be NXG. So maybe so. I think NXG. I don't want to belabor it too much, but I think it definitely uh, it did not turn out the way we thought it would initially. It's a good lesson learned in software design and requirements. Um, and I don't know. I think we actually got a lot of incredible value out of the investments we made into NXG, and it's in a lot of the products that we make today. But I think that it began as well. We need to update the UI. Like it began as this fairly constrained set of requirements, and then I think it quickly snowballed. Right, that got refactored and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I think ultimately there was a lack of appreciation for the level of complexity and the importance of all the long tail of functionality that exists in LabVIEW, which made it, nearly impossible to actually replicate that level of capability in XG. So I don't know. We've derived a lot of value from it and parlayed those investments into like the updated Veristand capabilities, System Link, NI Package Manager. Did I say Veristand? And G-Web, of course. So like we got a lot of value out of it, but it certainly took a different path than we anticipated. Is that a good answer to your
Yeah,
question?
yeah. So in hindsight, do you feel like maybe, if I understand you correctly, it was too big of a step, and maybe taking several smaller steps would have been perhaps would have led to a different
Yeah,
outcome of some kind? Yeah.
yeah. I think ideally that's why the software world gravitates towards like more regular releases on a regular
Hmm.
basis, show value soon, and check and adjust. Right. So
Yeah.
I think yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's a good lesson, because that, in general, that is the one mistake that I think people make more than any in software that I see, is they just try to do too big of a thing. And I feel like getting in this small step of like, do something small and then check it and make sure it's right and then move on. Because I feel like, particularly in the software world, you can spend a lot of time debugging. And the longer you go before you check to see if what you did is right, then you spend more and more time debugging. And so any time that you save by moving faster always seems to get lost in the debugging phase. At least
Yep.
that's my experience.
Yeah. Yep.
Uh, cool. Any more parting thoughts? We're kind of wrapping up soon, in a few minutes.
Um, I mean, like I said, I've been back in this role for the last 5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks now. And I think there are a lot of things, some of which we've already spoken to, that my team and I are really committed to doing towards uh, building closer ties and relationships with our users and the community. I think my closing comment will be I attended several GLA Summit presentations. I think that was like my second week back in the role, and I was just totally blown away by the quality and the knowledge and the passion for LabVIEW and our tools. And so I see that, and I'm just so excited to re-engage with this community and to really shift our relationship of one where we're trying to elevate and empower the community. And so I'm very open to, and I want feedback from yourself and other members of the community to how we can better serve the people that love and use LabVIEW and really evangelize it on our behalf. So feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or via email. Anyone watching this, that is, if you have ideas or commentary, or if you want to start an event in your area, like I'm here to really do what I can to enable your efforts. And I'm really excited to work with you guys.
Cool. I do have one last question that just kind of popped into my head though.
Hit
So
me.
you're actively involved in the community, and then you kind of stepped away and did the self-driving stuff. What changes?
EV.
EV, yes, not self-driving EV. So what changes have you noticed in the LabVIEW community at large over that time? Like when you came back, was it basically the same thing, or did you notice some changes, if any?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of the community events were really created, run, and organized by NI, right? Like think about the CLA Summit, and then we have like the technical symposiums and developer days and NI days. So like, and in the absence of those, obviously, I think the community has taken upon themselves to recreate that. And I guess my personal feeling is it's better, right? There was always kind of this corporate influence of NI, understandably.
Mhm.
And now it's more of this independent voice of the user. And so I love it. I know there's some people that are saying, hey, bring back the CLA summits. And I want to understand the nature of that ask and if we can serve that differently. I'm not opposed to it, but I think that's one of the things I'm exploring. But I guess coming back, it's great to see that the community has really invested themselves and their energy in creating content, creating YouTube content, creating these GLA summits, creating and supporting these events. And I think that's the biggest thing that's changed. The center of gravity is kind of shifted away from NI at the heart of everything towards now the community is more in charge of their own destiny, and we're here to support and enable. So I think that's the biggest dynamic shift I've seen.
Yeah, I think that's good too. I mean, it was rough at first. It was, there was a lot of turbulent water trying to figure things out, and a lot of people were kind of upset to see and I pull back. But Steve was always the promoter of like, hey, we should be doing these things ourselves anyway. And I do think there is some value in that because, I mean, NI Week was great and we got great content, but it was all the content that NI wanted us to see and not
Yeah.
necessarily what we as a community wanted. And there was some overlap, and that's great. But now it's more what we want to see. So I think that's a good shift from my
Yeah, left to
perspective.
NI, I mean, I think the prevailing sentiment is still like, well, object-oriented programming, that's just for the advanced people, right?
Yeah.
Like actor framework, so I think, like it or not, NI continues to be very focused on getting the new user, appealing to that mechanical engineer who doesn't want to be a programmer. That's where we see our influx of new business. I'm here to constantly remind people, hey, a lot of the existing recurring business is driven by people that are using LabVIEW in very sophisticated ways. And so we need to
Mhm.
continue to understand and value them. But are you going to see NI suddenly like shift into a huge marketing campaign about building abstraction layers with plugin architectures? Probably not. And so I think that's where the community champions those causes. And they do a better job than we would. And I think it's actually really important to the continued success of our users.
Great. All right. Thank you, Eli.
Thank you for the time.
That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @TheLVExperiment.